Good morning, everyone, if you are joining from Hong Kong, and good day if you are joining online. Welcome to this Policy Dialogue Series 2024-2025. My name is Professor Naubahar Sharif. I am the head of the Division of Public Policy here at HKUST. Today marks our first in our 7th year of Policy Dialogue Series, and we continue to go from strength to strength. This Policy Dialogue Series features Professor Anthony Cheung and Professor Tai-lok, both from the Education University of Hong Kong, and it is an activity jointly organized by the Department of Social Science and Policy Studies of the Education University of Hong Kong and the Division of Public Policy at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, from where we are broadcasting today. As I mentioned, we are in our 7th year of this Policy Dialogue Series, and today's session on the 19th of October is entitled Hong Kong is Not Over, Why and How? Economic Reset and International Impact. I will be the moderator for today's session, and we are privileged to be joined by 5 distinguished speakers. First, to kick us off will be Professor Anthony Cheung, who's from Education University of Hong Kong, as I mentioned, also an adjunct professor at HKUST and the former Secretary for Transport and Housing. After him, we'll be joined by remarks from Professor Tai-lok of the Education University of Hong Kong, followed by Professor Wang from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and then Professor Tang, Heiwai from the University of Hong Kong, and we will be concluding our session with remarks from Professor Wang, Xiangwei from the Hong Kong Baptist University. Today, there are 3 of us here joining in person, myself moderating the session, Professor Anthony Cheung and Professor Wang Xiangwei, and 3 other speakers will be joining via Zoom. So without further ado, seeing that we have a packed session and we have an extremely interesting topic, I would like to hand over the floor to our first speaker, Professor Anthony Cheung, from the Education University of Hong Kong and former Secretary for Transport and Housing. Over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Naubahar, for introducing us. Now, today's topic, Hong Kong is not over. The reason why we have this topic, I suppose, is because early this year, in February, Stephen Roach wrote an article in Financial Times, and he said, it pains me to say Hong Kong is over. And his view does have some influence because he has been an investment bank chief economist. So is Hong Kong over? Has been a question asked throughout the past months. So my short answer is Hong Kong is not over. And we can speak to that by referring to some statistics. But of course, we have to be very careful in terms of putting that reply within the changing context. And I'm going to outline the way I look at the context. We have 2 renowned economists on our panel. I'm sure they will provide you with more analysis from the economist's point of view. Now, let us look at the economic situation. This is the way the HK as our government put it back in August. Of course, the situation is still evolving in a way, but I would say the basic analysis remains the same. Now, this is from the government's statement about the economic situation in August. Now, if you look at that statement, you can summarize that by saying, well, the view is our economy in Hong Kong continues to grow, but so there are a number of buts, right? In terms of exports, export of goods have been doing well, but exports of services saw decelerated growth. Government consumption has been expanding, but private consumption is on a decline. And there are geopolitical tensions, interest rate uncertainties at that time, but geopolitical tensions remain. In terms of inbound tourism and private consumption, the view is rather negative up to that point. I think in terms of what happens in the following couple of months, I think the situation remains the same. Now, if you look at the real GDP growth by selected components, you will notice that in terms of consumption, public sector, government consumption has been moving up versus decline in private consumption. In other words, it has been public consumption that has been supporting GDP growth. In terms of exports, we have mentioned the difference between export of services versus exports of goods. So the situation is still rather uncertain, overall speaking. And but recent figures perhaps could tell us that, well, are we already reaching a bottom-out situation? I think that is the question. We are not getting worse, but are we sort of have we passed the bottom-out line? The economic situation in Hong Kong has been subject to fluctuations in the economy on the mainland. And because of the closer integration between Hong Kong and the mainland economically, because of Hong Kong's increasing dependence, if you like, on mainland investment, mainland economic performance. So let's look at the mainland situation. Again, there's a bit of uncertainty. Now, I'm quoting here on the slide from the Vice Director of the National Development and Reform Commission when he made his report to the National People's Congress Standing Committee back in September. Of course, we know following September, there have been high-profile announcements by the central government ministries rolling out various measures to boost consumption, to boost investment. But I think his basic analysis, as reported to the National People's Congress Standing Committee, remains valid. Now, I put his report in Chinese here, but essentially what he was saying is there has been increasing adverse effects of changes in the external environment, geopolitics, for example, increasing protectionism in various countries, insufficient effective domestic demand, diverse performance in economic operations. In other words, some sectors have been doing relatively well, but other sectors have been facing increasing challenges. And there are many risks and hidden dangers in key areas. But the key word is key areas. And then you have pains in terms of transition from old economy to the new economy. The new economy more driven by IT, more driven by new productive forces. The policy measures rolled out over the last couple of months have received mixed reception, if you like. I mean, we all know that the central government is very determined to re-stimulate the economy. But there are diverse views among economists, among commentators regarding how effective or how quickly effect could be seen. Now, I'm on the right-hand side of my slide. I also quote the analysis made by a Stanford professor for IMF back in December last year. Of course, the situation now is slightly different from the situation then. But I think his basic analysis, again, in my view, remains valid. And he said, well, the Chinese government is facing a number of policy dilemmas. How to continue reducing debt while maintaining growth, how to reduce energy-intensive production while the economy continues to rely on heavy industry, how to get the markets to exert financial discipline, even as the government tries to strengthen state control, and how to restrain wealth inequality while relying on the private sector to generate more wealth, and how to encourage private sector innovation while cutting successful private enterprises down to size. Now, this is the way he put it, but from statement made by the Chinese government, the government is reasserting or reiterating the position that the private sector is being valued. Now, but this is the dilemma that overseas observers are looking at. But this professor, he said, that if the government plays its card right, one could equally well envision a more benign future for the Chinese economy. Now, this is essentially my view as well. I think the fundamentals are still good, but of course, there are fluctuations at the moment. So what about Hong Kong? Hong Kong is directly affected by the mainland economically, and Hong Kong has been facing problems of economic cycle every now and then. And right now, we are also facing structural changes. And I put Hong Kong's challenge as a triple whammy, a threefold kind of challenge. First, the 2019, the post-2019 setback, and COVID-19. I don't think I need to explain, but we all know that there are consequences from the 2019 social or political unrest, and then the impact of COVID-19. Geopolitics, we know the tension, the conflict between the US and China, the global geopolitics becoming more unconstructive or even vicious in a way. And then because Hong Kong has been so dependent on factors, on the mainland factors, which is quite natural, and therefore we are bound to be affected by economic disruptions and vulnerabilities on the mainland. Now, Stephen Roach mentioned the 3D, which is quite commonly the basis for some critical analysis from overseas: debt, deflation, and demography, meaning population changes on the mainland of China. I would say that if you look at the last few years, the main challenges are rather the 3 Ps: how to deal with the private market, the popular market, how to deal with the platform, the digital platform economy, and how to deal with the private sector, private enterprises. Bearing in mind that the private sector on the mainland of China provides 80% of urban employment and 90% of enterprises, particularly the SMEs. So how to handle the popular market, how to handle the private enterprises, in my view, are very vital to re-stimulating the economy. We have just heard a couple of days, or 3 days ago, what the Minister of Housing of the central government has said. And he suggested that the housing market on the mainland has more or less bottomed out. Now, if that's the case, of course, things will become slightly better in the days to come. But we have to be still rather cautious. Now, Hong Kong also faces the question of whether it has been losing competitiveness and the geopolitical space. I would present or summarize the situation, that kind of dilemma or that kind of difficulty, by the 3 alphabets, A, B, C. A standing for asymmetry, Hong Kong versus the mainland economically. In the past, Hong Kong, this asymmetry may well have favored Hong Kong, but no longer. Rather, I'm seeing a reverse trend. The asymmetry is working better for some mainland cities, Shenzhen particularly, because it's so next to Hong Kong. So you have got northbound consumption by Hong Kong people every weekend or even on weekdays. B standing for bottlenecks. We face some structural bottlenecks in terms of human and financial capital, particularly the international doubt about one country, 2 systems in Hong Kong. Some of them consider that Hong Kong is now exactly the same as the mainland. Now, if that's the case, then we face similar risk factor as these overseas investors apply to the mainland. And the C stands for competitiveness, whether we have been weakening in terms of core economic strength versus the mainland and the region, the wider region, Asia, for example. I've been tracking how the World Bank global governance indicators have been rating Hong Kong. Now, unfortunately, the 2014 update which will reflect the situation up to last year, 2023, is not yet out. According to the World Bank website, it will be out in the next few weeks. So let's watch out. But based on this table on my slide, now from 2017 and then 2019, when the social unrest happened, and then 2022, we can see that in terms of, there are six angles, six criteria. If you look at government effectiveness, regulatory quality, rule of law, control consumption, and also political stability, by and large, we are doing relatively well. Right? Of course, less well in terms of political stability, and but we are improving compared to the last 3 years. But in terms of voice and accountability, which tries to measure freedom, liberty, the democratic system, for example, now we are being rated less well. And the trend has been going down, which is a bit worrying, because that will affect international perception on Hong Kong. And bearing in mind that we are looking at how the World Bank regards Hong Kong, based on those indicators. We are not looking at some more radical views, and there are radical views around. So we have to be quite careful in terms of how Hong Kong projects its international image. The big question, has Hong Kong lost its magic? Now that has been the question being asked over the last couple of decades. I remember the same question being asked before the 1st of July, 1997, when Hong Kong returns to the motherland. Now, my basic views are, first, some fundamental strengths remain. Our core institutions are still functioning relatively well. Efficiency of the government, regulatory quality, rule of law, things like our judiciary. And recently, Hong Kong has risen by 2 places from last year to become the world's 5th most competitive economy, according to the Swiss Institute for Management Development. They have got this world competitiveness ranking. And just last week, we have returned to #1 position in terms of the market. We are the world's freest market, according to Fraser Institute. So according to those angles, we are doing well. We are not losing out. However, the main question is whether we are still demonstrating distinctness while being integrated with the mainland and remain a free and open society, because that's the question being asked in some quarters. And second point is, we have been doing well in the past, but the past success formula may no longer work, or may no longer work that well in light of changing global political and the security situation. The central government has been urging Hong Kong, the SL government, to spend more time to strive better for reform. Reform not just in the small R sense, the big R, major reform, structural reform with a vision into the future. Now, of course, we know that the Central People's Government will not allow one country, 2 systems to fail. But how it looks at one country, 2 systems may well be different today because of the changing situation. But the central government will definitely support Hong Kong at all costs, as we can see over the last few years. And at the current juncture, because of the changing geopolitics, China all the more needs an outward-looking Hong Kong because of the economic adversity. But the question is Hong Kong doing well enough to provide that kind of gateway, not physically, but the overall sense of being a gateway into the world, and also telling a good China story from the Hong Kong perspective to the world. I think that is the challenge to us. So Hong Kong may not be over. In my view, Hong Kong is not over economically, but that does not necessarily mean Hong Kong will regain its former global glamour easily. because the glamour depends on how other people look at Hong Kong. We have to have a new search for competitiveness and purposefulness right now. And my main few points are, how do we broaden the economy? To broaden the economy doesn't mean we give up what we are best in. So finance is still our trump card, but we need to have something more than finance. So the way I put it is finance plus. Okay? Innovation technology. We should not just repeat what Shenzhen is doing, because we may not have enough manufacturing base, for example, but we have got finance. We have got the professions. We have got some services. So how do we leverage those strengths of Hong Kong? As a talent hub, are we still attracting people from everywhere? Now, we know that Hong Kong has been doing very well in recent years in attracting talent from the mainland. But what about the rest of the world? How do we leverage the Greater Bay Area? How can Hong Kong be special? This is the point emphasized by the central government. In my view, to be special means that Hong Kong can do things better than some major cities in certain areas. Are we still doing better than some major cities in certain areas? And what are those areas? Now, if we are not doing better than major cities, if we are just doing as well as major cities, we are not special. We are not adding value for, under one country to systems. Is Hong Kong still a preferred venue for diversification risk? In the past, Hong Kong has been doing very well in that direction. But now, if the risk factor as regarded by overseas investors equates Hong Kong as the mainland, then we may not have an edge in that particular aspect. And some companies may well move to Singapore as the safe haven, as a third-party venue for diversification of risk. All along, we have been talking about how Hong Kong can contribute to China's modernization. What do we mean by that? How do we articulate our added value? And remember, we must be good in contributing towards high-end development. We should not be aiming at the low end. That's why I would say I would be quite critical of the so-called intention to develop panda economy. I don't think Hong Kong should go into that direction, although I would not discredit any contribution from that kind of initiative. And how do we still be international in the new geopolitics? The context has changed. US-China relations have changed. So how do we reinvent Hong Kong's role as an international city? Finally, to sum up, I would say that we should focus on the 4 R's. First, restructuring our economy, but not losing sight of our strength. We should be still doing better in what we are good at, but then we leverage what we are good at. We will add other things to redefine Hong Kong's value, to refine Hong Kong's assets. Before, innovation in policy, innovation in everything, but we have to dare to reform. We should not be sort of confining ourselves. Regionalization, not just the GBA, but also Asia. Since 1997, Hong Kong has been branding itself as Asia's world city. What do we mean by that? Now, Singapore is very conscious of its Asianness. I don't think Hong Kong has been that Asian compared to Singapore. So if we still try to be doing better than Asia, think Asia. And what does that mean? I think that should be one way we should examine ourselves. Finally, re-intermediation. In the past, we have been playing a very effective role in terms of intermediation between East and West. Now we have come to a juncture when we need to reinvent ourselves in that kind of intermediate role. That's why I say re-intermediation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Cheung. Next is, So moving quickly along, next we have Professor Lui. Professor Lui Tai-lok is an adjunct research chair professor at the Education University of Hong Kong and is a former vice president at the Education University of Hong Kong And he will be picking up on this East-West collaboration point that Professor Cheung just ended with. So over to you, sir, for your comments. Wait a second. We cannot hear you. Just wait. Not yet. You have to unmute yourself. And if you could try speaking now. Just give us a second while we get over these technical glitches. And while we do overcome these technical glitches, I just wanted to mention today is the first of our policy dialogue series. We have 5 altogether in this series. The next one is on the 23rd of November. The third one is on the 18th of January. The fourth one is on the 15th of March. And the final one is on the 26th of April. So please mark your calendars for these upcoming 5 policy dialogue series that we have in this academic year, spanning from today's kickoff one on the 19th of October to end on the 26th of April. Okay, let's try again.
Okay, now I
yes,
managed to mute it.
Please, over
again,
to you.
very sorry. And before starting, I must apologize to all the panelists for jumping the queue, and later on I won't be able to join the discussion. I'm very sorry about that. This relates to the presentation I'm going to make as well. It's, of course, it's my own personal fault, but at the same time, I'm the kind of guy that probably it's easier for me to work out the difference in international timeline between UK, Europe, and Hong Kong, but not quite when I'm traveling in Asia. So I thought I logged in earlier this morning, and then I find out that it's I got in the wrong time. Very sorry about that. So I'll move on and I see if I can share my screen. It seems that okay. So can you see my PowerPoint?
I think it's on its way. It says you're sharing your screen, but we can't see the PowerPoint yet.
No.
No, there's a black screen which says you are sharing your screen, but your PowerPoint slides are not available. Okay. We did catch a glimpse of your slides for a second, right at the top, as one of 3 screens that were moving around. If it doesn't work in another 30 seconds, maybe you could consider just speaking to us without the slides, which is another option. Okay, I think Professor Loy is trying to re-log back in.
Okay, you can't see me.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Again, I think it's disabled. Sorry about that. Any chance the host have my PowerPoint so that I instead of share screen?
Sure, we'll try to get the PowerPoint up, and maybe in the meantime you can just start speaking and telling us about the content of your PowerPoints verbally while the host tries to upload your PowerPoint. We can see you now, so maybe you can start. And Oriana at the back, maybe you can help us upload Professor Loy's PowerPoint and we can click through it.
Well, okay, actually my PowerPoint is very brief, and I'll just focus
We can see it now.
on a couple of points. Okay, I see that you have that already. I used the title of Elvis Presley's song, A Little Less Conversation. And of course, the following sentence is more action. Because I very much echo to other panelists. Probably the overall discussion is about economic development as well as our current condition. But at the same time, I tend to think that a big part of Hong Kong's economic future, and as well as one country, two systems further development, rests upon Hong Kong's ability to maintain its international profile. And this is the reason why I focus on this. And I do think that, you know, in order to ensure that Hong Kong is not just any or another mainland city, Hong Kong needs to continue to maintain its international profile. Next page. But when we kickstart the discussion about internationalization, one thing I noticed that in the past few months, everyone keeps saying that, you know, internationalization is very important to Hong Kong. No one seems to disagree. Everyone repeat the same sentence again and again. But I have a feeling that, you know, the consensus doesn't mean that we have made further progress in restoring Hong Kong's international profile. I must say that, you know, we need to admit that what happened in the past 5 years or so, including the 2019 social unrest as well as COVID-19, it does have a big impact on Hong Kong's international profile. And it triggered quite a lot of reactions from foreign countries, and particularly, of course, the United States. Of course, I'm well aware of the fact that, you know, it has a lot to do with geopolitics. It has to do with a lot of things that, you know, in a way, out of our own control. I do agree with some of our friends saying that, you know, it's not so much that we don't want to be international, but some countries seems to be trying very hard to de-international Hong Kong, which is, well, partly true, but at the same time, is there anything that we can do on our side? I think this is very important. And at the same time, I do understand that when we look at internationalization, we shouldn't just rely on those social indicators that we have been using. For example, we have a connection with USA and at the same time with the so-called Western countries. So as a result of that, probably a lot of people saying there's a reduction of various kinds of connection with the US and Europe in general. But at the same time, of course, we can recognize that, well, a reduction of, say, US companies' regional headquarters in Hong Kong is not the only thing that we need to care about. We can rebuild new friendship with other countries so that, you know, our internationalization perspective should always be broader. So we shouldn't worrying too much about the role of US and so on. Yeah, this is partly true, but at the same time, I do think that we need to recognize that the changing geopolitics does have these wider repercussions, and somehow we have to cope because to disconnect with the West, I think is a big challenge that we have to really look into. Next page, please. So we have heard a lot of proposals and suggestions that, okay, without the US or even European countries, of course, we can turn to ASEAN countries or Belt and Road countries. Of course, there are good options. And I do think that, you know, we should work on those countries and new potential partners and see what we can do with it and how we can rebuild our not only international profile, but our role as a connector in those countries to the broader macro economy in the world. But at the same time, I tend to think that can we also take another good look at Europe and identify potential partners among those continental countries? There are countries that we have long linkages and connections. And at the same time, we do understand that, European countries' reaction to China, reactions to the changing geopolitics, not exactly the same. We have seen Spain, Germany seems to voice out other concerns. We do have find Central European countries probably a closer partnership with Beijing and so on and so forth. My idea is saying that, why I say a little bit less conversation and more action is there are partners over there that we have long connections, and then how to strengthen them and improve them, and not just thinking about economics, but also about culture and other aspects of exchange, and to turn them into eye-catching new initiatives. In other words, you want to tell people that you're coming back, you're returning. I do think that you need to have some sort of branding activities and cultural exchanges with European countries. That seems to be something that we can do and we are capable of doing. And this is something that, we should look ahead of time instead of waiting for suggestions or signals from Beijing that this is country that now you can work on it. I do think that we should take a good look at what exactly do we mean by the West. Of course, it's so-called West, but don't write it off, and see how the unpacking would help us. Next page. I know the term city diplomacy is a sensitive word because we are very much part of one country, and in other words, we shouldn't have any intention or any move to depart from Beijing's overall diplomatic orientations and so on. But at the same time, I think the city itself should explore areas that we can safely play an international leading role. I'm aware that the term city diplomacy came up around a period of time when globalization was a hot idea, and then we haven't been talking about Cold War or new Cold War at that time, and that's why a lot of people think the city probably have a much bigger role in the transnational economy and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I do think that even though the context has changed, there's still something that we can learn from it, especially that Hong Kong needs to remind people and then to show that we really are able to have a very open, especially in the cultural domain, in areas that don't really touch on diplomatic politics or international politics, that we're coming back. Something as simple as repackaging our international film festival and how to make sure that it is not just another annual event, but bringing in international guests, international leaders coming in and make it a real high-profile international activities. We need to have identified areas that we think that should be safe enough. Say, for example, any chance of international NGOs conference in Hong Kong in areas that we think we can manage. That is something that we probably should consider. In other words, I do think that we need to work a lot harder to find a space that Hong Kong can show its character. I think recent attempts by DSL government's leaders keep reaching out and going out and visiting other potential partners. That's one part of it. The other part of it is about bringing in people and making Hong Kong again the stage, the platform for international activities. Last page. So I do think that, whether Hong Kong is over, that topic really worth discussing. And then I do think that its coverage should go beyond the economy. And somehow the economy and the internationalizations are really interrelated. And but at the same time, I do think that we need to go beyond that question and say, not only Hong Kong is not over, but in fact, it is really coming back with a lot of examples, a lot of showcase to people that, Hong Kong is a place where you can really find international activities that perhaps other mainland cities are still very much behind us. Where are those areas? What are we doing? And in fact, I like what I said earlier, we need to rethink what constitutes an international profile. In previous decades, probably we have been too much focused on the US, too much focused on UK, and a lot of old partners. But like what I said, among some of those Western countries, we can try to unpack and identify really potential partners and see we can strengthen and move forward. At the same time, I think a lot of ideas about Belt and Road, ASEAN countries, worth looking into. But the most important thing is Hong Kong the stage? Is Hong Kong really the platform that people would think, I need to reach out, I need to know more, that Hong Kong is the place? Because sometimes when I think about Belt and Road initiatives, while surely Hong Kong has a role, but at the same time, wouldn't Beijing or Shanghai or even Xi'an would have a lot of closer affinities with those countries? So as a result of that, if there's an international platform, would it happen in Hong Kong? That sort of things that we need to look into and see how to identify our real cutting edge. And lastly, I think Hong Kong really need to showcase, and this is why we need more action, is things are still happening in Hong Kong. And in fact, there are a lot of subtle initiatives that already been put forward by Beijing, and Hong Kong should really play it up. For example, for people carrying foreign passport, and then they have been residents in Hong Kong for more than 7 years now. Many of them can apply for Wuhengzheng, the kind of document for easy entry into China. I think that is very important, and that is some very important message to spread out to the local business community that has high connections with overseas partners, and see how Hong Kong is becoming the main channels for them for easy access to various areas. At the same time, when crews that are arriving in Hong Kong ports and overseas travelers can enter Hong Kong and then through Hong Kong to enter the Greater Bay areas without visa, I think that is something that Hong Kong should really actively play the role in packaging packages for those overseas tourists, and see how Hong Kong would be a good springboard for that kind of new overseas and China and Hong Kong's interface. But these are the things that I think already happening, but Hong Kong really need to reinforce it and tell us that we are ready, and then we have already come back. So I'll stop here. Again, sorry that I won't be able to join the discussion later, but I'm sure that I'll learn a lot from you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lui. Thank you for delivering your presentation despite the earlier technical glitches. In our opening remarks by Professor Anthony Cheung, he talked about us having economists with us today on our panel, and I would like to introduce the first of those economists. Professor Song Yan-Wing is from Chinese University of Hong Kong. His presentation is entitled, "Is the Worst Over for Hong Kong's Economy?" Professor Song is an adjunct professor in the Department of Economics at CUHK. He is also an associate director of the Economic Research Center, Institute of Asia Pacific Studies, and also an associate director for the Shanghai Hong Kong Development Institute, both at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So without further ado, I hope there are no more technical glitches. I would like to hand over the floor to Professor Song.
Well, thanks for the introduction and the invitation to the
Okay,
to participate.
Yep.
Yeah.
We can hear you fine. Please go ahead. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And I will start in the interest of time. I will start to share screen right away. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, I have to start. Okay, see this screen. Start from the first one. Huh? Okay. Yeah. And the title is, Hong Kong economy is the worst over. And okay, without further ado, okay, the question is the worst over? And the simple answer is yes, but the economy is still in the doldrum, and it is not on any path of sustainable growth right now. Okay, the worst is over in the sense that the downward spiral has stopped. Downward spiral in population and labor force, due to emigration, negative GDP growth, falling asset prices, property prices and equity prices, okay? China's recent big stimulus package in late September has helped, okay? So the population fell from the pre-COVID peak of 7.5 million to a low of 7.3 something in mid-2022, but rebounded, okay, by mid-2024, exceeding slightly the pre-COVID peak by a small amount, okay, due to largely aggressive labor and skill importation, and also a one-way permit migration from the mainland, okay. Residential property prices, which has fallen by 27%, okay, from its peak, has likely stabilized, okay. We have yet to see it, but I think it is happening. However, unlike residential property, if you look at Grade A office and commercial rental, it is still falling due to a very high vacancy rate. It is projected to fall further. Okay. And we have very weak growth that after 6 long years, okay, Hong Kong's GDP has only just regained its 2018 level. And for the graph here, we have starting from 2018, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. The bottom one is Hong Kong. And as you can see, by the end of 2024, I just took the government estimate that we will grow by 3% this year. And if we do, okay, we'll be just back at 2018. Okay, if you look at China, which is the top line, its GDP would be 33%, 1/3 higher than that of 2018. For the world as a whole, it will be 17% higher. For Singapore, it is 14.5% higher. Singapore grows a bit less than the world average because it's a developed economy. By and large, advanced economies on the average only grow by 9.7%. So Singapore's record is good. Hong Kong's record is dismal. In fact, if you look at all economies in the world, and unless there is a big war or civil war or things of that kind, it's very difficult to find an economy that performs as badly as Hong Kong in the last 6 years. Okay, and as you can see, in the last 2 years, we do have positive growth, but it is only very weak recovery from a very steep recession. So it's a very long, prolonged U-shaped rebound, okay, not any kind of sharp rebound. Okay. And Hong Kong's growth is 40% beneath Singapore and 9% beneath of advanced economies. And as I said, it's very difficult to find an economy that performs badly. Okay. Despite that, now we have positive growth. Okay, if you look at the growth in the last half year, first half of 2024, that is the latest figure we have, 3% growth, and we look at the growth is largely driven by export of goods and largely by government investment. export of goods grew by 7.1%, as Professor Anthony Cheung has also said. But that is likely over-exaggerated because, I mean, businesses are anticipating trade restrictions by more strict restrictions by US and EU. And whoever wins the US election in November, trade restrictions are going to go up. That's more or less for sure. So people try to anticipate that, and all the goods from China, and a lot of that go through Hong Kong, before these restrictions come into place. So you see this export of goods going quite well, but that is slightly exaggerated, and it's not going to be sustainable. Gross domestic fixed capital formation grew by 3.1%, more or less the same as GDP. However, if you look at the private and the public portion, the private portion has gone down by close to 6%. Public portion surged by 34%. Most of the increase in fixed capital investment is driven by public spending on building and construction. And that is again not sustainable because the government budgetary situation is not good. I mean, it has a dwindling fiscal reserves. Consumption depressed, okay, it fell by 1.9%. So it is not any kind of a sustainable growth. Well, in particular, if you look at government, Hong Kong's investment in machinery, equipment, and IP, okay? And well, here I have 3 columns. It starts from year 2012 and it goes down to the 2024, the first half, okay? You look at the total investment in machinery, equipment, and IP products, which is most important. Well, if you look at our gross domestic fixed capital investment, okay, what we have in the previous slide, more than half of it is spending on building and construction, okay, building highways and what have you, and housing. And I think if you talk about high tech and innovation, there's investment in machinery, equipment, and IP products, okay? Then the total investment divided into the private and the public portion. The public is red, the private, the private is red, the public is brown. If you look at overall, the expenditure investment has gone down, okay, to a low of 2022 was the worst year. That was the COVID year, okay, low. It rebounded, but there's a proportion of the GDP, okay, there's what is reflected as percentage of GDP. It has gone down not only absolutely, but also relatively, okay, relative to the GDP, it gone down from close to 14% to 5.8% in 2023. If you look at the first half of 2024, this is only half year, so the absolute figure is only half of what it would be. But if you look at percentage of GDP, it's gone down to 4.1%, which is the lowest that we have so far since 2012. But if you divide it into public and private portion, we look at the public portion, it has gone up by a lot, not only absolutely, but also as a percentage of GDP. This percentage of GDP was 1.1% in 2012. It has gone up to 1.8% in the first half of 2024. So public investment in high-tech innovation and so on has been growing very fast. But it is not bearing fruit in a sense that it doesn't bring much of, if any, private investment at all. If you look at the private investment, it has gone down, absolutely, and also relative to the GDP. It has gone down in 2012 from close to 13% of GDP to, in the first half of this year, only 2.3% of Hong Kong's GDP, which says that private investors are extremely pessimistic, despite growing and increasing government investment in technology and IP it is not spilling over to the private sector. Okay. So what is the reason? Government investment may be misdirected, okay? The business model may be inappropriate. It may be very high geopolitical risk. So whatever the government does, private investors are not going to respond because the geopolitical risks are high. Now, I'm sure that quite a few of you have seen a lot of statistics on that Hong Kong is not doing a lot in research and development. The Shenzhen is spending 5% of its GDP. Hong Kong is spending only a little bit more than 1% of our GDP. So as a percentage of GDP, our R&D expenditure is low relative to Shenzhen and China and what have you. But if you look at Shenzhen, 90% of the Shenzhen's expenditure on R&D comes from the private sector. I mean, from the non-government sector. Okay, only 10% come from the public sector. Whereas in Hong Kong, we have a lot from the public sector. Okay, if you look at first half of 2024, the private sector investment is only slightly higher than that of public investment, unlike the situation in Shenzhen. So the Hong Kong government is doing a lot, but the private investors are not doing much. Unlike Shenzhen, where non-state firms are doing a lot of R&D, Hong Kong firms are not. Okay, and Beijing lately has seen that. I mean, I have been trying to tell this story for 2 years that R&D in Hong Kong is low, chiefly not because of government, but because of the private sector not responding to government initiative. Okay, and Beijing has lately saw that, and Beijing has lately, in the last couple of months, called for business to increase their investment in innovation and technology. They call on the business to support the government, and which I mean, and they're well known. I mean, people from the establishment said that it's chiefly directed to lack of private investment in R&D, that they should support government initiative. Okay, so Beijing in the last 2 months saw what I have been saying in the last 2 years. Okay, but I think the response from private enterprises will likely be questionable. Okay, that private investors, okay, they look at what is profitable, and and as you know, in Cantonese there is a saying that has long been a saying about high-tech investment. High-tech high yeah, low-tech low yeah. So I'm not optimistic. Okay. Well, the government has been importing labor and skills very aggressively, but it has not yet reversed the fall in Hong Kong's labor force. Okay, if you look at Hong Kong's labor force and the employed person, okay, it was close to 4 million back in 2018, but then it went down to a low. Okay, 22, that was a COVID year. Okay, and then sizable rebound till around mid-2023. There's mostly the rebound due to relaxation of COVID controls. But after that, in 23 and 24, as we know, a lot of 高才通 high-tech, I mean, from the talent scheme from the mainland, that over 140,000 of them has come to Hong Kong. But it hardly made a dent in our labor force. In fact, if you look at the latest factors, our latest labor force is still a little bit less than that of the peak, not the peak in 2018, but the peak in mid-2023 after COVID relaxation, okay, relaxation controls. So despite the fact that we imported a lot of labor, it hasn't done anything, I mean, to the total labor force. You may ask why. No, I think the chief reason is there is a negative effect of an aging population. That the aging population by itself would mean that our labor force would shrink extremely fast. without importation of labor. Importation of labor as yet is still not big enough, has not yet been able to offset the negative effect of aging. But of course, I mean, all these talents from the mainland, maybe not all of them are in the labor force right now, okay? Maybe not all of them are interested in staying long-term in Hong Kong and so on. So it's kind of a fluid situation. However, my judgment is that the labor force will likely re-expand if labor imports continue at the current pace, okay? Because it's extremely huge imports of over 100,000, close to 150, 60,000 per year, okay? Okay, the last slide. Now, the downward spiral of Hong Kong economy has stopped, but the question is, will sustainable long-run growth resume? My answer is not yet. And we haven't seen that yet. Though the government has launched many policies to promote growth, sustainable growth will not be forthcoming unless and until private investors resume investing. And we are not seeing any sign of that right now. We are still not seeing any sign that private investors are resuming investing. The adjustment likely to be long, okay? Investment in innovation technology typically has long gestation periods. Integration with the Greater Bay Area will unlikely bring immediate relief because, well, Hong Kong's integration with the Pearl River Delta, there's the old term, the fashionable term is now as Greater Bay Area, but it has a long history, okay? It started with China's opening in 1979. So most of the low-hanging fruits have already been reaped. And other fruits high up will take a long time to ripen as deep integration faces numerous systemic constraints. Well, one positive sign is as long as peace and order are preserved, that if a war does not erupt in the Taiwan Strait, for instance, okay, the continuing attractiveness of Hong Kong to young talents, especially those from the mainland, remain our strongest asset, okay? We have been able to attract a lot of young talents from the mainland, and that is a highly positive sign. But whether they will stay a long time in Hong Kong, whether they will develop, the career in Hong Kong, has yet to be seen. So there is still a lot of uncertainty. And we are not yet able to see any sign of sustainable, not long-run growth resuming right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Song. So, as you know, HKUST is hosting today's dialogue, and we have a panel of distinguished academics. So we're running through the universities in Hong Kong with HKUST, EDU, Chinese University, and now our next speaker is from Hong Kong U. He is Professor Heiwai Tang. He's the director of the Asia Global Institute. He is a Victor and William Fung Professor in Economics at the Hong Kong U Business School. He is an Associate Dean for External Relations at the Hong Kong U Business School, and he is also the director of the Hong Kong U APEC Study Center. And over to you, Professor Tang, for the next 12 minutes with your presentation, please.
Thank you, Professor Sharif. Can you see my slides?
We can see you. Yes, and now we can see your slides. Perfect.
All right, great. So as the fourth speaker of this panel, I don't have much to say because, in the last half an hour, you have heard three distinguished scholars who have been studying in Hong Kong for many, many decades. And they very quickly summarized the current situations Hong Kong is facing, but also still some opportunities. But let me start by summarizing, their points. I think Professor Cheung has mentioned very briefly that, Hong Kong is still unique, and maintaining Hong Kong's uniqueness is probably, the priority for the policymakers in Hong Kong. And you may remember that, this year's Nobel Prize winners in economics are three distinguished economists and political scientists who study essentially institutional foundation for many successful economies. So I guess, you don't need to be convinced that, Hong Kong still has quite lots of institutional advantages, including not only the one country, two system, but our very robust and sound financial institutions and regulatory bodies, as well as our very transparent and still very solid legal system. So all this need to be maintained, and that's the first priority, in my opinion. And second, as Professor Song has just discussed, we are facing depopulation, or I should say, negative growth in population, especially in the labor market. Using Professor Cheung's 2 points, we are facing still sort of the aftermath of the 2019. One is related to all sort of chaotic events in 2019, and obviously 3 years of COVID that is still shaping our evolving economy. So without solving the decline in population, in particular the decline in the labor force, Hong Kong is going to lose competitiveness, especially as compared to our neighboring cities in the Greater Bay Area. Okay, so these are the 2 points that I want to highlight. So before I move on, let me remind you about an event tomorrow, a bit of advertisement for myself, that I'm going to give a 1-hour talk about the future of the Hong Kong economy in the Central Library in Causeway Bay in Hong Kong. Unfortunately, it's going to be in Cantonese, and I'm going to talk for an hour based on essentially the same set of slides that I'm going to show you today. Given that I only have 10 minutes left, I won't be able to go through all of them in detail. So it's a teaser, and I'm trying to convince you to come tomorrow to listen to the full version. So let me tell you what I'm going to do in the next 9 minutes. I have 8 set of facts, essentially trying to provide some numbers and make it even more transparent and empirical for you to understand what kind of challenges that the Hong Kong economy is facing. Some of them are already mentioned by Professor Cheung, Professor Lui, as well as Professor Song just now. Perhaps this graph is a sort of graphical representation of what Professor Song just said. Hong Kong's economic development in the last few years have been pretty bad. He mentioned in the last 5 or 6 years, essentially real economic growth is around 0. And this slide shows you the volume of Hong Kong's economy measured in constant Hong Kong dollars is essentially flat since 2018. And if you ask me, what's the current situation of Hong Kong, we are still not back to our economic output level in 2018. All these are measured in constant prices, so therefore it's not due to deflation. And the green line highlights, how volatile our economy has been. As a small open economy, subject to all sort of external shocks, including geopolitical shocks. It's not surprising to see that, our economic growth rate is not, fluctuating around a trend. It's actually fluctuating around a flat line. So as an example, in 2021, due to the strong Chinese economic recovery, our economic growth is actually close to 7%. But because of the high base, but also sluggish economic recovery in the last year of the COVID, in 2022, our economic growth was actually around -3%. So many of you know that Hong Kong is still very specialized in several professional service sectors, including finance. The so-called 4 economic pillars have been still growing in dollar values, but in terms of a share of the Hong Kong GDP has not been growing. In terms of the employment share, it has been declining. So here you see the Hong Kong dollar values of the 4 key industries, including finance, tourism, trading and logistics, as well as all sort of finance-related professional services, such as legal and business consulting services. Most of them are not doing great, with the exception of finance, which has had steady growth in the last decade, but the other 3 pillars are essentially not growing. In the case of tourism, it's actually declining due to COVID, and it's not rebounding quick enough. And this is a slide showing you the employment shares as well as GDP shares contributing by the 4 pillar industries. In terms of GDP share, it has been fluctuating around 55 to 56%. In terms of employment share, it has been declining from around 47% to only around 40% in recent years. So, the four pillars are not doing great, and we need to find new economic activities and new economic sectors. So let me review a little bit about what's going on in finance. In terms of asset under management, we're still doing great. Around 31 trillion Hong Kong dollars under management in 2022. The Hong Kong government has been promoting Hong Kong not only as an international financial center, but also international wealth management center. There have been policy incentives to attract rich families to set up their family offices here. Obviously, our competitor in the region is Singapore. So some money has been coming back from Singapore to Hong Kong. But I guess, we have to really convince the rest of the world that, we are still unique, we are still international, and it's a safe place for them to stay, to store their money. Another way to look at, the health of the financial sector is obviously the capitalization of the equity market. You can also look at, the IPO amount in Hong Kong. In 2022, Hong Kong is losing its status as the most vibrant and number one IPO center because in the first 2 years of COVID, we were actually doing very well. For example, in 2020, Hong Kong IPO listing amounted to over 400 billion Hong Kong dollars. 2023 is only 1/10 of it, making us only ranked around 7 or 8 in the world in terms of IPO listing. And people were pointing out that we are not doing as well as India, which has been doing quite well in terms of IPO last year. But let me remind you that this is actually not that difficult to catch up. For example, this year we had a mega IPO listing for a sort of home appliance company in Guangdong, and that company itself already boosted us from number 7 to number 4 just because of one additional IPO listing. And that company on the initial day of trading is worth around $38 billion. So, a couple more mega companies being listed in Hong Kong already changed our IPO image. So the Hong Kong equity market is still relatively cheap as compared to the US market, for example, compared to the Japanese market as another example. People like to talk about the PE ratio, price to earning ratio. It was 17.5 in 2020, and now it's dropped to 10. So if you look at fundamentals, quite a lot of companies are actually quite cheap and worth investment. And obviously, as Professor Cheung has mentioned, the private sector has not been very eager to invest in Hong Kong stock market or Hong Kong new industries because, they are not too optimistic about, the short-term economic outlook. So, one thing that, we need to be rest assured is that, the Hong Kong monetary system, especially measured by foreign exchange reserve, is still very sound, very robust. We still have over $400 billion foreign exchange reserve, which is around 5 times of the monetary base in Hong Kong. So, no worry about the stability of our PAC, no worry at all about, whether there would be a potential currency attack. Let's talk about business formation as my third set of slides. I'm going to be quick. So number of local companies incorporated has been rising since the end of COVID, but we are still not back to the level in 2017 or 18 when we have close to, this is 150,000 new companies being created on average every year. So 2024 is not going to be as great as 2023. And one of the reasons is that, the consumers are not staying in Hong Kong to consume. And the new tourists, especially from mainland China, are not spending as much money in Hong Kong. So this is one fact that, despite a rising number of tourists coming to Hong Kong in the last 2 years, the average spending has been decreasing. And, as we all know, a lot of Hong Kong people are going north to spend their time in the Greater Bay Area over the weekends. So there has been a net tourist outflow, not to mention that, the inflows of tourists are not the same kind of tourists that we used to have coming from rich cities in mainland China or coming from rich countries from the rest of the world. So, up to 2024, we were not able to provide the decomposition of, countries of origins of the tourists. But as you can see that, the mainland tourists are still the main composition, the main driver of our tourism in Hong Kong. And when the Chinese economy is doing great, the tourists are not spending as much in Hong Kong. Let's look at the retail business. Either we are looking at restaurants, hotels, shops, shopping malls. The number of people may have increased, but the average spend has been declining, meaning that the profit margin has been declining. For example, the value-added ratio for the retail sector in Hong Kong has dropped from 16% to 12%. Gross profit margin has dropped from 7.4% to around only 6%. Right, business is not easy in Hong Kong. Land sales has been declining, and this is a major source of government revenue. And this also suggests that not only the property sector is not providing the wealth effects that we used to have in Hong Kong, but the government is also facing quite a lot of fiscal challenges. One perhaps welcoming news is that the rental price to house price ratio has been rising, which means that the rate of return for housing acquisition, housing purchase has been rising. If believe in basic financial model, if rental return is kind of like dividends coming from buying a stock in the stock market, then the fundamentals have been improving. And now with new policies coming out from the new policy address, which was just announced a few days ago, I believe that there will be some slow recovery in the housing market, not going to be in a few months, probably in a year or two. So very quickly about international trade, because of the US-China trade war, because of all this rerouting of global supply chains with more goods being shipped from China to ASEAN, to the Middle East, to Eastern Europe. Hong Kong as a re-exporting hub, mainly for mainland Chinese exporters, has been suffering. Volume of trade has been recovering slowly from 2020. Something that we should focus more on is actually offshore trade, meaning professional services provided for trade that is happening outside of Hong Kong, outside mainland China. There's no reason why we cannot become the next London in terms of offshore trade center. One of the reasons for why our trade volume is declining is not only because of slowing China's export, but it's also because our cost of international trade handling has been higher than our neighbors. So for example, I'm moving very quickly. Hong Kong cargo port, for example, if you need to handle a 20-feet container, it costs around $2,100 as compared to $1,100 in Shenzhen, or only $500 in Shanghai. Because of the high costs, the ranking of Hong Kong as a port is declining. It used to be number 1 in 2000. After 24 years, we are now ranked number 9 in terms of the volume of trade. Finally, let me just remind you, contributed around 19% of government revenue. Now it's only around 4%. Profit tax usually account for around 28%. Now it's 31%. Salary tax is never a big component for us to generate government revenue. So, I have been promoting, in multiple channels that, Hong Kong government needs to really think about broadening its tax base. So, with shrinking government revenue due to declining land sales, not surprisingly, government expenditure has been above government revenue since 2021. And therefore, what has happened is that, the government fiscal reserve has been declining from over 1,000 billion, meaning 1 trillion Hong Kong dollars, to less than, currently less than $700 billion. And the rate of decline is actually alarming. So what should we do, with all this not so positive outlook for Hong Kong economy? First, as I've said at the very beginning, make sure that we maintain our strengths and uniqueness, and essentially maintain our institutional advantages. So a few months ago, in response to Steve Roach's paper on Financial Times, Fred Ma and I wrote a piece for SCMP saying that there are 7 strengths that Hong Kong needs to maintain in order to make the economy resilient and international. Obviously, financial stability is the most important, followed by independent judicial system. Clean and efficient government is something that we are proud of for many years. We should continue to maintain free flow of capital, people, and information. Make sure that the internet is still open and people in Hong Kong can still have access to, let's say, Google and American websites. Strengthen our education system, especially university education, to attract more foreign talents to come to Hong Kong is also something that we should focus on. Finally, let me remind you, this is not the first time that people talk about the future of Hong Kong, talk about rediversifying Hong Kong, talking about Hong Kong being too reliant on one sector, which is finance. In 1996, there was a debate between 2 teams, one from Hong Kong University and one from MIT. The book on the right was written by 8 MIT professors from different disciplines, saying that Hong Kong needs to strengthen its education system to provide a more applied science talent. The government should have some rotation system to get talents to work in the government and allow them to spend 3 years in the government, and similarly allow some officials to spend a sabbatical outside of the political system to learn something new in the industry, in the private sector, in finance, whatever. So, when I read this book again today, almost 30 years later, I realized that a lot of the proposals made by the MIT professors are still valid. One thing that the Hong Kong government has listened to the 8 professors from MIT in 1996 is that they established the science park, but there are a lot of details that they talk about what science park should be that were not adopted. But we know we are moving on. Something that I'm very optimistic about Hong Kong in the near future is that, one, we started to see a lot of startups in Cyberport or Science Park, and hopefully some of them will become unicorns and help Hong Kong to be transformed to a more resilient and high-tech city. And second, we started seeing lots of non-Chinese and also non-white students studying in universities, especially at Hong Kong University. In 3 to 5 years, I hope that we're going to have a very diverse and robust talent base, making us to look different, but remain international and also serve as the gateway between China and the rest of the world. I'm running out of time. Let me stop here. I'm happy to take some questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tang, for that wonderful journey through your slides. Last but not least, we are moving to Hong Kong Baptist University, where we have Associate Professor of Practice, Professor Wang Xiangwei, who will be talking to us about the need for long-term plans in Hong Kong. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharif. And thank you, Anthony, for having me again. It's been my honor to be part of this panel of distinguished speakers to talk about this subject, which is very dear to my heart. Hong Kong is not over. Stephen Roach is an acquaintance. I met him after that article was published on the Financial Times when he visited Hong Kong. I think what he said that he did not write that headline. The editors of FT wrote that headline. But anyway, the sentiments expressed in his article were widespread, shared widespread outside Hong Kong. So today I'm going to talk about 2 issues. One is that Hong Kong needs a long-term plan, and secondly is that I believe Hong Kong should do a much better job of telling its story well. The reason that I want to talk about this is that I think Hong Kong is, over the past 2 years, Hong Kong is bouncing back. But as the previous panelists have argued, Hong Kong is not out of the wood yet. And one of the things that I have observed is that if you speak to the political or the business elites here, particularly the Hong Kong officials, if you ask them what Hong Kong will be in in 5 years' time, I think, most of them will be hard-pressed to give you an answer because, they haven't even figured out how to deal with the problems on hand. I mean, let alone what's going to happen to Hong Kong in 5 or 6 years' time. But from my point of view, I think it's critically important for Hong Kong that not only to deal with the problems on hand, but also to think very clearly what Hong Kong should do in the medium term and long term future. I think this is part where Hong Kong is very much lacking, and I want to make a suggestion. And before I do that, I would like to talk about Hong Kong's 5-year plan. Sorry, China's 5-year plan. As some of you know that China's 5-year plan was first started by Mao Zedong in 1953. It started, that was one of the most important tools in the bygone era of command economy, where every commodity in China, was given a very rigid production quota. I think from 1953 to the early 1990s, the 5-year plan was seen as a kind of a relic of another era and command economy. But however, that, right now we are in the 14th 5-year plan, 2021 to 2025. But the current 5-year plan is no longer its formal self. That is, the previous 5-year plan of the bygone era is mainly a focusing on production targets. And nowadays, China's 5-year plan is much more than focus in economics. I think it has served as it now covers every major segment of the society, from the economy to environment to education to social programs. And right now it serves as a guideline for the whole country, and particularly for the leadership, to show how the country should move forward. I think right now China is drafting its 15th 5-year plan from 2026 to 2030. I want to spend a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, to talk about this drafting process. This drafting process involves a whole of government and a whole society approach. That every major department in China, every official, from the central government downwards to the village official, they all have to be part of this process and to studying, the past problems, to debate and then put forward proposals. And at the same time, let me give you an example that, this was reported by the Xinhua News Agency. When China sort of drafted the 14th 5-year plan for the period from 2021 to 2025, the central government commissioned about 60 think tanks across the country, including, at the universities, the ministries, and to research and study 30 major programs which they believe will be crucial for China to upgrade its economy. And then in the end, produced more than 130 major reports for the leadership. And then the leadership will, based on those findings, to draft the 5-year plan. So the point I would make is the drafting of the 5-year plan is it's not merely having officials working on a plan. It's kind of to mobilize all the major resources in the society and the government to think about this, to focus their minds on the challenges and the opportunities that China is facing, and then to come up with a consensus that how we can move forward. And then this has come to Hong Kong. As some of you know, that from 2016 to 2022, I was based in Beijing. And then at the end of 2022, I moved back to Hong Kong, and I joined Hong Kong BU at the beginning of 2023. And then ever since I came back over the past nearly 2 years, I made this point to, I was invited to various forums. I remembered at the end of 2022, as soon as I came back, I went to speak at one of the forums, organized by a business group. So I mentioned that Hong Kong needed a 5-year plan, and I will not mention names. And then there's one businessman from one of the most prominent families in Hong Kong. After I explained the history of China's 5-year plan and why Hong Kong needs a 5-year plan, and he cut me off curtly, and he said, "We're Hong Kong. We don't do 5-year plans." And I said, "What is wrong with the 5-year plan?" You see, right now, our city have resisted the introduction of the 5-year plan purely for political and ideological reasons. I think if you speak to the political elites or the business elites here, and they'll say, "Oh, the 5-year plan is a product of the bygone era, is a remaining elements of planned economy." But I strongly disagree with that, because as I explained early, that China's 5-year plan has evolved significantly. Right now, it serves as a guideline where that it can sort of mobilize and focus minds of everybody to have a long-term vision. I think Hong Kong needs such a plan. As I said to the member of that prominent business family in Hong Kong, I said, if you find it very difficult to accept a 5-year plan, can we call it like a 4-year plan or a 6-year plan? So long as Hong Kong needs a 5-year, needs a long-term plan. And as, I think right now what is happening is that, particularly after the riots in 2019, and particularly after the Beijing directly imposed national security law in Hong Kong, I think right now the impression is that, over the past nearly 2 years, Hong Kong has been looking up to Beijing for guidance. If you read the speech given by Hong Kong officials, if you read the mainland media, the Hong Kong media reports, you get the impression that Hong Kong officials here have started to adopt the mainland style lingo and practices, and then the Hong Kong civil servants are now sending officials to Beijing, to learn from the bureaucracy in Beijing there. And I've been making this point to lots of people in Hong Kong who are willing to listen. I told them that right now those people are learning the wrong stuff. 5-year plan is one of the very good things I hope the Hong Kong civil servants will study. I mean, because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, this can really, this calls a whole of government and a whole of society approach to debates and study challenges and opportunities so that the Hong Kong society can reach a wide consensus on how to move forward. To be honest, I prefer that if Hong Kong adopts such a plan, it will continue to be called the 5-year plan, because it will better dovetail with the National Development Plan. And secondly, our CE also has a 5-year term, right, Anthony? Yeah. So I think I just want to mention this point so that can get some people to think about the absolute necessity and the need for Hong Kong to have a long-term plan, and then for Hong Kong to as I said on my PowerPoint, to emancipate the minds, seek truth from facts, and unite as the one in looking to the future. I'm sure some of you will know that this words in quotation marks, those were the title of the most significant speech, one of the most significant speeches Deng Xiaoping gave in 1978, when he decided to open up China to the outside world. And I'm running out of time, but then I'm going to use the next 2 minutes to talk about another issue which is very dear to my heart, is how to tell Hong Kong story well. I think as the previous panelists have argued that Hong Kong is bouncing back. But then again, I think what's sort of Stephen Roach's article implied, that Hong Kong is over, that kind of sentiment, as we discussed earlier, is widely shared outside Hong Kong. I think, meanwhile, as some of you know, I've been a journalist for 30 years. And now I'm teaching communication at Hong Kong Baptist University. And I believe it's so important that, I think is very important for Hong Kong to tell its sort of a story well. And I'm unfortunately, and Hong Kong is not doing a very good job. And here, because I'm running out of time, I'm going to use the next 2 minutes to make some suggestions. One is, I think Hong Kong needs to do a much better job in three areas. First, Hong Kong must do a better job of explaining itself to the people of Hong Kong. I think right now that our society is still sharply divided over many issues. And I'm not quite sure that, our government is really doing a good job reassuring our community. I think, right now, my observation is that you have those people who still talk every day about the good old days of Hong Kong before 1997. And then you have those, increasing number of people, those political elites are now adopting the mainland style lingo and the languages, looking up to Beijing for guidance. And then you have the silent majority of middle class in Hong Kong are uncertain about the future of Hong Kong. And secondly, I think Hong Kong definitely need to do a much better job of telling Hong Kong's story well to the outside community. I can tell you from my own personal experience is that, my daughter is now studying in London, so I go to London every year over the past few years. I think before the law of the law of national security law was imposed in Hong Kong, and you know, if I went overseas, you know, I mean, every time I struck a conversation with those people, and I was very proud to say I was from Hong Kong, and the response was very enthusiastic. Oh, you're from Hong Kong, been to Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a nice place. And then, you know, over the past 2 years, you know, if I was outside Hong Kong and told people that I was from Hong Kong, you know, I will get a very sympathetic smile and say, "Oh, you're from Hong Kong. Are you still okay? Are you okay?" I think right now, what had happened is that Hong Kong was being painted as an international prison. You know, every time there was a news about Hong Kong, it was always about Jimmy Lai or all those people being jailed. And I think more importantly, Hong Kong needs to do a much better job of explaining Hong Kong to the people in Beijing, the Chinese officials. I think right now it seemed to me there was only one-way communication of officials in Beijing telling Hong Kong what to do. You know, I've made this point many times in the past. I think Beijing has already laid out its very clear direction for Hong Kong, because our leaders in Beijing have already made it very clear that the one country, two system will continue, and secondly, the common law system will continue. Now it's really up to the officials in Hong Kong to tell the people in Beijing what is the best way for Hong Kong to move forward. But unfortunately, right now, my impression is that now the officials here are looking up to Beijing for guidance. And I'm telling you this, that no one in Beijing knows how to run a capitalist city in Hong Kong. Okay, I just leave this thoughts with you guys, and my time's up. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Wang. That was a really fitting conclusion to today's talks. We did have some technical challenges. We did overrun, some of the speakers overran by a little bit, so we don't have too much time for question and answer. I usually kick off by posing a question myself, but because we only have 15 minutes, I would like to today open it up to the floor or to those who are joining us on Zoom to ask any questions that you may have. And we have one straight away. How to attract money back to Hong Kong, given that we have the national security law, when the driving force of repelling money away is way larger than the attraction, can we still maintain a balance between profit and cost of absorbing money in? Basically, how can we continue to attract money in? So anyone on Zoom, the speakers on Zoom, please feel free to chime in, as well as those who are present in person. Maybe I can start with Professor Tang to perhaps tackle this viewer's question. How can we attract money back to Hong Kong? Because in your presentation, you talked about IPOs, you talked about the attracting funds back to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is a financial center, probably the most explicitly, so maybe I can pose this question to you. Given the backdrop of NSL and so forth, how can Hong Kong do a better job of attracting money here?
So there are two kinds of financial flows, broadly speaking. One kind is short-term financial flow, and those hard money has been flowing in and out of Hong Kong in response to any policy changes or any unexpected shocks. So for that kind of flow, I think, you know, we have already experienced, you know, quite a lot of volatility in the last few years. And in my opinion, you know, investors are looking for profit constantly. As long as they did the right return and risk analysis, they will continue to invest in Hong Kong for short-term profits. Okay. But there's one exception, and I may say the US funds may find it a little bit challenging to convince their ultimate investors, like, you know, those pension funds in the US, to reallocate more resources to Hong Kong and to mainland China. Given that 1/3 of our Hang Seng Index companies are essentially related directly or indirectly to Chinese technology, we shouldn't be surprised that the American investors may not see those companies to be investable, partly due to our own situations, but I would say mostly because of the U.S. government scrutiny and potential increase in regulation. So that's one. The second kind of financial flow is more longer-term financial flow, and let me use foreign direct investment as an example. I think those investors outside of Hong Kong need to be convinced that Hong Kong still has a robust economic future, that we will have our way to diversify our economy, and those startups that we have seen emerging in the last few years in Hong Kong will be able to expand to a scale that they believe that those are going to be the new drivers of Hong Kong advanced economy. So I think for that the investors have not been convinced and feel too optimistic that we already had a blueprint about how to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Yeah, so let me just conclude. People used to laugh at me, but I think more people seem to be convinced that this is the way to go. All right, let me stop here.
Thank you. Professor Song, anything that you would like to add online before I ask those who are present on this question?
Yeah, I think just a short response. I think Hong Kong is a small economy without any kind of natural resources. So the most important resource in Hong Kong, besides is legal system, regulatory system, and common law and all of that. Is talents. That and lately, we have been very attractive. To talents from the mainland, but as yet, we don't know if they are coming. Some of them may be coming because the kids look for an education in Hong Kong, and after going to school in Hong Kong, they may mainly want to go to the US and overseas and so on. Use Hong Kong as a stepping stone. They may want to utilize the Hong Kong education system instead of trying to build their career in Hong Kong. So for a few years, I think we won't know. We won't know if that they will have a workable model. That the mainland talents coming to Hong Kong will find it fruitful to build their career in Hong Kong. If they do, I think there is a lot of hope in Hong Kong, and we don't have to worry about not attracting money to Hong Kong, because if Hong Kong is good in innovation and startups and so on, it will attract money. Money swiftly go after talents. Not the other way around. But whether mainland talents in the long run, we'll find Hong Kong a good place to build a career. Has yet to be seen, and that is my brief reply.
Okay. Do we have any more questions, or perhaps from those who are present today in the audience? Yeah, let's have a question from the audience member before we go online.
Well, thank you very much. I wonder, for Hong Kong, there's a lot of emphasis on innovation technology, but how much risk would the Hong Kong government could take or would take, and how much risk do you think the central government would take?
For innovation and technology?
Innovation technology.
So maybe I can ask Professor Song this question, because I remember you had one slide on innovation and technology.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, investment in innovation and technology, I mean, is bound to be a long-term investment. And it's a game of, I mean, that is a winner-take-all game. I mean, there are very few winners and a lot of people who lose. So, I mean, it's bound to be a highly risky game. And the question of how much, I mean, risk the government can take, I mean, is a good question, because, I mean, the government has been investing a lot of resources. I mean, as I show in my slide, but it has yet to bear fruit. I mean, the private investors are not responding, and the government has a stringent budget. I mean, it has high fiscal deficit with dwindling fiscal reserves. And such a situation is not sustainable in the long run. So I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, so if the government keep on, I mean, trying to implement its present plans, I mean, to invest even more, and but given the fiscal constraint, and if it doesn't bear fruit in terms of higher GDP growth and more taxation revenue, it's not going to be sustainable, obviously. So I mean, so the answer is I don't really know. I mean, it is a very risky game. I mean, that there is a winner-take-all game. Yeah.
Thank you. We had another question, which is related to the last 20 days announcements. There have been several announcements of the last 20 days with the Chinese government trying to boost the economy, boost the property market. And I wanted to first start with Professor Anthony Cheung, because much of your data was until August and September, but as we've seen over the last 3 weeks, many announcements. What impact do you think those very recent, but very big announcements will have on the general sentiment, on the general outlook, the economic development, and plus the property market? And I will also ask Professor Tang to respond after this.
Yeah. Okay. The last question about the new measures rolled out by the central government and how those measures might affect Hong Kong. I think the main challenge to the mainland Chinese economy is that of the liquidity trap. It's not that China or the economy itself, people, households don't have money. I think in terms of national savings rate, we are doing very well compared to other economies. But having more savings doesn't mean good, because you don't spend, you don't invest, right? So the question is, the sentiments are not that favorable. That's why people are reluctant to buy, they're reluctant to spend, they are reluctant to invest. So you have to turn around the sentiments so that there is a virtuous sort of liquidity chain that will support sustainable growth. And I think for the whole of China right now, the main challenge to the central government is how to turn around sentiments. Now, if the government is really able to sort of re-stimulate the property market, I think that will be a very important impetus to new sentiments, to more positive sentiments. And that will also affect other sectors of the economy as well. Now, should that really happen, I think that will definitely help Hong Kong. Because if the mainland economy is doing well, then you have people willing to spend more in Hong Kong, whether by way of consumption or investment. And Hong Kong will definitely benefit. Now, that's a general context. But of course, whether Hong Kong is well positioned to benefit from the new opportunities, of course, that depends on Hong Kong. So I think in that sense, Hong Kong might benefit. But again, looking at it more specifically, well, will Hong Kong really benefit? I mean, what about other cities on the mainland? I mean, will Shenzhen benefit even more? So we need to ask ourselves whether we still have that uniqueness, comparative advantage, should there be a new opportunity of new growth on the mainland. I think that is something, a big question on us. Now, I would also like to address the first question regarding attracting money back to Hong Kong because of NSL, because of Article 23 legislation. Now, I agree entirely with what Professor Tang and Professor Cheung have said earlier. And I think Hong Kong doesn't have natural resources. All along, I mean, since British times, the main resource of Hong Kong, the main resources, if you like, are two: location and people. Location attracts people. People also attracts more people, investment. So the question is, are we still able to take full advantage of our location, the geopolitical location, if you like, or the geoeconomic location, and also people, because Professor Tang earlier mentioned, or rather Professor Wang, what about the middle class in Hong Kong? Do they see a future in the coming years? Now that will affect the people factor, migration of talent, or even in terms of attracting talent. Even if they are willing to come, would they stay on for a long time, for long-term investment, for long-term career? Now, in terms of attracting money, it's easier to attract money on a short-term basis. Certainly, the stock market sort of rebounds, and then you have speculative capital coming in. Now, that's not the main concern here. The main concern is long-term. Now, I don't think NSL and Article 23 on their own should be a hindrance. Look around the world. Now, Singapore, I don't think the same question will pose to Singapore. We won't ask Singapore, are you able to attract money back? Now, Singapore has got their own national security law. In terms of the provisions, those provisions, I would say, are not less tough than Hong Kong. But why has Hong Kong been made a story of being a prison for many years? Now, then we have to ask ourselves, not just because of us not telling a good story, but because when people look around and they might get different impression. So we must ask ourselves, are we, I mean, having a national security law is not the problem, in my view. But if we are projecting an image of a national security city, then that's the problem. Thank you.
Professor Tang, did you want to comment on the recent announcements and the potential boost to the property market?
Yeah, just very quickly, because Professor Cheung already said most of the stuff that I plan to say. I think, the central government is doing everything possible to increase confidence in the consumer and the investors market. It seems that they realize that, economic growth is under some pressure, and, they are providing quite a lot of new policy guidelines for local governments or for PBOC to move in the right direction. I mean, let's hope that it is sort of similar to the end of the zero COVID that we have seen in Shanghai 18 months ago, and this is sort of the economic version of it.
Okay. Yes, of course.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Anthony said earlier about Hong Kong's unique advantages. One is the location, the other one is people. Talents, and also mentioned by Professor Song. I want to add, I want to stress the importance of the system. The reason that Hong Kong has been so successful over the past 100 years is because of the capitalist system and the capitalist way of doing things. And I find it's very interesting that the word capitalism is no longer mentioned by certain people in Hong Kong. I mean, what is wrong with that? Because Beijing has made it very clear that one country, two systems will continue in Hong Kong. And some Chinese leaders even suggested the one country, two systems will last even longer than the 50 years promised by Deng Xiaoping. But then again, I think the sort of perception and is such that even certain people are reluctant to mention capitalism. I mean, that's, one of the points that I made earlier in my little presentation. And it's, regarding how to communicate with people in Beijing. I think, particularly after the national security law was imposed in 2020, I think it has been made very clear to everyone that what one country means. I think particularly after the national security laws imposed, the international sentiments and also the domestic sentiments towards Hong Kong has changed. I think that more efforts to be made to determine what's the two system mean for Hong Kong. I think maybe, if there is one more suggestion I can make is that I think our leaders in Hong Kong should go up to Beijing and have a heart-to-heart talk with officials in Beijing to find out what is Hong Kong's parameters to operate under two systems. If you say one country, two system to continue, what are the parameters? So that let's sort of agree on those parameters, and then we move forward as a one. And the second point I'm going to make about the money coming back to Hong Kong, again, back to this point I made earlier, so long Hong Kong remains as the capitalist city with those unique advantages, the money will come back, short-term and long-term. As we, I was already invited to meet with one of the world's largest pension fund managers next week. I was told, I think next week, there is going to be a meeting of the world's top pension fund managers in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, so long as we continue, so long as Hong Kong maintains that advantages, Hong Kong will remain that place where the international investors will come and use Hong Kong as the base to try to understand what is happening in Hong Kong, in China. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Wang. I think we do have to draw this today's session to a close. We have overrun, but we did suffer some technical difficulties. So I would like everyone online and in the audience in person to join me in thanking today's speakers, Professor Anthony Cheung, Professor Lui, Tai-lok, Professor Song, Professor Tang, Professor Wang, for a very insightful discussion. I think we could have gone on for another hour with all the questions and comments that I'm sure that many people had. But in the meanwhile, before we close today's session, I just wanted to remind everyone of the next session, which will be hopefully equally interesting, equally intriguing, on the Saturday, the 23rd of November. The title of the next session is Lessons in Policy Delivery, and we're going to be talking about waste disposal charging, online car hailing, and mega events. And as you can tell, all three of those issues are key hot topic issues in Hong Kong today and over the last several weeks. And we'll be joined by Dr. Kay Lam Chi Yan, Professor Christine Low, Mr. Bernard Chan, and it'll be moderated by Assistant Professor Benjamin Stewart. And they will be joining Professor Anthony Cheung and Professor Loy in discussing those issues. So from HKUST, thank you so much for joining us. Please join me in thanking our speakers, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Good day and goodbye.